suddenly has a soul that needs to be protected. And this is where you'll see battles where people say, you're ruining it for all of us. You've done this. And it's not just that you've made this bad move, but you have hurt the community, the scene. And what ends up happening there is that you end up with a debate tool. You end up with the equivalent of an ad hominem attack or so on. That's basically a fallacy presented to say, well, you can't do this because this is the kind of thing we wouldn't do. That's not right. Don't do that. And so a lot of conflict arises from that. In the hacking community, that experiences a lot because you basically have two sets of people who are at cross purposes with each other. You have people who consider hacking to be an extension of... Okay. You have people who consider it to be something which they call something else, but which is probably an extension of the Coyote Loki myth, which is the idea of a intelligent trickster who is able to move nimbly through things and cause trouble, but in a fun sort of way at the end of it, in a way that you're both admirous of the fact that he's taken you for this, and yet in fact taken. You have in fact, so it's there's that kind of archetype which shows up in hacking and which is portrayed in the media and stuff. And then you have the other group that look at hacking as the intense overview of technical matters, in which they considered it to be a career path of some sort, in some variation. And the two both call themselves hackers, but they'll kill each other in the wild. They're not really compatible, but they both want this terminology because all the other, terminology. And so what you end up with is a lot of conflict over what is essentially a lexicographical or a etymological mutation. Basically two groups who said, oh, this is kind of the same thing. And you can kind of track it back. I found this with bulletin boards when I did my documentary, was that you had two sets of people who built computers with soldering irons and people who built computers with milk money by going down to the store and buying it at Sears. And both of them consider themselves to be the original gangsters in computers. And they don't, like, these guys, the new guys tend to look at the old guys as like, well, that's cute that they were playing with fire before we were able to advance onto the beach. But the other group is just like, ooh, these kids are nothing, they're just ruining it. Everything's plastic. They've ruined it. You can't even open half of them. So, again, you just end up with a case where there's this certain amount of real estate that's being applied, and both people want the real estate, the pride, the fun of being part of this community. Is this at all where you wanted to go with this? I would assume most of you are interested in knowing about the Coleco vision and the atom, as opposed to the... I'm trying to think of, like any fun speaker, you start to pull from your own personal knowledge. And my own personal knowledge, I talk at cons as if everyone knows who the hell I am. How many people here have never heard of me or don't know who the hell I am? 1, 2, 3... And you don't know. Okay. I should have introduced myself. My apologies. My name is Jason Scott. I run a site called textfiles.com. This site collects old bulletin board system text files. It's a site I started in 1998 to collect old bulletin board system text files. But unfortunately, I'm an obsessive compulsive, so I ended up moving from bulletin board system text files to general internet text files in other sites to recordings of things from bulletin board era, which became audio.textfiles.com, to any kind of interesting technology PDFs or academic papers, which became pdf.textfiles.com. I'm starting a nonprofit this year called the BBS History Foundation. Over the course of the last 4 years, I've been doing a documentary on bulletin board systems, which we're going to show tonight, called BBS The Documentary, which I'm selling as a DVD, but which I'll show a couple episodes from, which has interviews with 200 people that I conducted, like I said, over about 250 hours of raw footage, culled down into 8 episodes that total 5.5 hours. So this is one of these things where I get my head around something. And one of the side effects is that the longer you study technology and the longer you study any kind of scene for any extended period of time, you just start to see the patterns. You realize that not really any one particular scene has something overly unique about it. They merely have differing levels of energy. So it's very easy to look at, well, this group looks really interesting and this one doesn't. And sometimes it's just because this group is applying more energy to their task than this group. But you see a lot of the same spirit, I've come into contact with a number of people. This documentary put me in touch with a lot of people who people would consider vintage. And there's a gentleman named Kurt Vendel who collects Atari. In fact, he has the largest private collection. We believe it's the largest collection, period, of Atari memorabilia. There was a computer that Atari was going to come out with called the 1450 XLD, which came into their catalogs and was a picture of it, and it never came out. And he has it. And I mean it. He's got the one that they made because they were testing it. And he took it apart, and it's a nice damn computer. It would have been nice if they made it, but he's got it. This is a gentleman who has collected Atari to the point that parts of his collection tour in Europe and Japan without him. They're on loan so that people can see the Atari stuff. And he has given me a lot of insight into the way that he actually got started with collecting it. And I'm a big fan when you're collecting. If you're going to collect something, you should not fall into the trap. There comes a certain point when, like I said, there's money to be made. At one point, an Atari 2600 cartridge called Chase the Chuck Wagon became very popular, and a speculative market opened in this cartridge to the point that one Chase the Chuck Wagon cartridge in good shape could net you well over $100, simply because there aren't many. The Chase the Chuck Wagon game was created as a promotion for Purina, and you had to mail in certain proofs of purchase to get it, and almost nobody did because it was an enormous amount of proofs of purchase. So very few were manufactured. I think it was less than 1,000. And so as a result, they became this unbelievably rare thing, and everyone who's collecting had to have this, barely rare cartridge simply to do it. So you ended up with this aberration. It wasn't so they were go, oh, this is the really good one. You have to get to Chase the Chuck Wagon. It totally blows away, Pac-Man. It's a case of just, I now have chased it. You've gone from owning items because of their own particular worth into owning items simply because your collection has a little black square in it. And you need that black square filled. So that becomes the most important thing in the world to you. In his case, when he was younger, when he found out Atari wasn't manufacturing this set of computers that they had promised they would, he would call Atari and act like a third-party developer that was developing something for their serial port, and that he needed to speak to an engineer. And keep in mind, he's like 15, 16. And they'd put him through the engineer, and he'd go, "Hi, I was just lying. I want to ask you, about this and this and this and this." And they would ask him questions, and he'd go, "Is this part still here?" And they would go, "Oh, it's down at the company store." And he'd go, "Well, if I mailed you money, could you get it for me?" And they would. And that's how he started to get all this rare material, was he simply socially engineered himself into the Atari engineers department and went down to their company store. And he became known for this and started to collect. For a while there, I gave this up, but for a while I would see new Atari historical items, and I would go, "Kurt has to get a copy of this." And I'd grab it, and I'd go to Kurt, and Kurt would go, "Who do you think put that up there?" It happened again and again, and after a while I was like, here are some posts from the Atari VAX, the Atari message board that the engineers had. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I pulled those off the tapes." And this would happen again. So after a while I was just like, "Oh, just withdraw, knock my king over, and just walk away." So he's got me pretty much. I don't have to collect Atari stuff anymore. Kurt's got it. It's in his house. So don't worry. In fact, it was kind of interesting. I went to interview him, and I walked into his room, and I had this weird emotional reaction. I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. And it was because Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder of Atari, had gone off after Atari to do a number of bizarre companies, including Sente Technologies, which created a number of things. And then he also did a robot company. And this robot company had produced 2 or 3, 5? He produced 10 robots. Yay for... I have 10 minutes. Anyway, he had produced a robot company that produced these small, little, tiny plastic robots that looked like little dodecahedrons stacked on top of one another. And there was one sitting in the corner staring at me. And for years and years, I had seen these in ads, and I'd always wanted one. And I didn't know it. I had forgotten about it. I'm like, why do I feel good in this room? It's like, oh, I'm with my little celebrity robot now. I've met him finally. I've always wanted to meet that robot. There he is. And he just had one in the corner, just being a robot. Anyway, I guess I should open the floor after this very, very well structured talk. If there's anybody who has any additional questions about all the things we've learned here about the ColecoVision Atom. No. Yes.
So what's a ColecoVision Atom look like?
ColecoVision Atom. Let me see if I can. The ColecoVision Atom interfaced with the ColecoVision, and you know what? The ColecoVision looked like a black square with two. Oh, yeah, it's true. The ColecoVision looked like from the top, this is what the ColecoVision looked like. Basically what it looked like was a black square with 2 areas for the controllers. And then the ColecoVision had these 2 controllers that had a joystick and a small keypad hooked up through a spongy cord. I'm sure that's what they were called. I'm sure it's a scientific name. That could enable you to pull it out and play the games like that. From the side, it was basically a straight square like this. Now I'm forgetting off the top of my head if the cartridge plugged in the side or if it plugged in the front. Definitely didn't plug in the top like the other ones. The ColecoVision Atom was essentially a white square like this, which had a keyboard attachment, and I think around this distance, I'm sure I'll go home and be really sad, was a tape drive. And that's where you loaded in the cassette tapes. Oh, bitch. I'm sure she'll appreciate being called that on a recording. So the ColecoVision Atom was essentially, like I said, a white square that had a tape drive that was its primary. It used the ColecoVision Atom. It used the ColecoVision to play games, but it had much more memory than the ColecoVision, so that it could play even more. In some cases, they had deluxe versions of the games to try to move you into that brand. Again, like I said, it was manufactured by a third-party company. And actually, this happens a lot if you look into it. There's a lot of times where, like, there's a company called General Computer Corporation, GCC. Bastards did everything. Kind of freaks you out when you find out. They created a speed-up kit for Atari Missile Command, so that you could get some more life out of your $3,000 Missile Command by putting this chip in. And this chip would speed the game up and make it more challenging, and now kids would play it again. They didn't do this without asking. They did this without asking Atari. So Atari sued them and won. And in what I consider to be one of the strangest things I've ever seen, the settlement was they got a game out of them. And that's how Atari had Atari Food Fight, which was created by General Computer Corporation, who were the ones who did the work to make they made a modification for Midway on Pac-Man, which eventually became Ms. Pac-Man. And they also created the Atari, I believe it was the 7800. just this company is like just out there somewhere, you know. There's a reference when the Segway was being done. They have a from the book about the Segway being manufactured. They have